Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm excited to share my review of the Fujifilm XF 200mm f2 lens with an emphasis on sports, action, and wildlife photography. Now, I've been using this lens almost exclusively for the past several months with my Fujifilm X-H2S, which I'm filming on right now, and I must say it has truly impressed me in some ways and really let me down in others. We're going to talk about both of these today in the video so you can decide if this lens is a lens you want to purchase or if you're better off spending your money on something else. First off, let's talk about the build quality. The Fujifilm XF200 f2 lens has an all-metal construction. It feels incredibly robust. It's also weather sealed, which for wildlife and sports action photographers is a huge advantage. I've used it in very dusty, sandy, very humid environments. I've even used it out in the rain without a cover, and I've never had any issues with it. The lens feels very well balanced. Now, keep in mind, I use a battery grip on my X-H2S, but nonetheless, it feels very balanced whenever I'm hand holding it, especially compared to a previous big prime that I had, which is the Canon RF 400mm 2.8 lens. I found it light enough for hiking, hand holding, even hiking long distance with just a peak design strap, and I typically went anywhere between 3 and 5 miles. Now, the most important part of this lens, an area where I feel this lens excels, is the image quality. The lens is simply outstanding. When it grabs focus and hits, the clarity, sharpness, and level of detail that it provides, even into the corners, is exceptional. For wildlife and sports photography, it's important to get corner-to-corner sharpness because you don't always have time to recompose your shot. Your subject will quickly move within the frame, and you want to get the level of detail in the corners that you can, or at least as good as you can, so that you still have an acceptable image whenever you still want to crop in or reframe or recompose in post. The XF200 has a fast maximum aperture of f2, and even if you're using the 1.4 times teleconverter, it's still a 2.8 lens with a full frame equivalent of 420 millimeters. This allows for plenty of light gathering capability during the hours where wildlife are most prevalent, but also in gymnasiums and sporting fields where lighting is less than ideal for photographers. Speaking of capturing fast-moving subjects, let's talk about the autofocus. The autofocus system is where I feel this lens kind of runs into some issues, even on Fuji's flagship X-H2S. In static circumstances, the lens will lock onto the subject and works extremely well. But in those moments where wildlife is moving behind brush, or the background is really busy thinking birds in flight over water, or in an outfield with the backdrop right behind the player, it just doesn't seem to stay locked on, and the autofocus kind of gets confused. Its biggest issue is when animals are coming right towards the photographer. Now, in my case, it could have been the photographer behind the camera, but I tried every focus mode that Fuji offers and several others that I found on forums and on the internet, and I could not get an acceptable number of keepers despite my efforts. Obviously, these situations cannot be repeated with studio level control, but I was able to do things like play fetch with my dog and use him as a metric to try different settings, and even then, even with ideal lighting, very boring background, it just doesn't focus the way I need it to for an amateur photographer who doesn't have hours and hours and hours to spend in the field to get 1 to 2 great images. I'm trying to maximize the return on my investment for time. That said, for static subjects or portraits or even wildlife moving perpendicular to the photographer, the lens works well enough. But it is simply not to the standard of Sony or Canon or even Nikon at this point. Now, one of the things you can do to kind of help this a little bit, you can use the focus limiter switch, which allows you to set a specific range to help with locking onto the subject, and that does help, but it's just not what I want it to be. One of the best features on this lens, however, is its optical image stabilization system. It compensates for camera shake very well, allowing you to shoot at a handheld speed or handheld shutter speed while still maintaining sharpness in those lower light situations. This is particularly useful for shooting wildlife. You need a slower shutter speed to obtain more light, but don't have the ability or time to set up a tripod. I personally found this very useful when hiking, and honestly, it outclasses my Sony and Canon lenses in real-world applications. Now, let's talk versatility. While this lens is a prime, it does have a fixed 200mm focal length. It's compatible with Fujifilm's teleconverters. Fuji has even developed a specific 1.4 times teleconverter just for this lens. It's included when you buy the lens. It's very light. I have not noticed any decrease in speed or sharpness in the real world when using the teleconverter, and I did test it with and without with my dog. So you can rest assured you will have the ability to use the teleconverter to get closer without compromising image quality. This flexibility is a game changer, especially for wildlife photographers who need that extra reach to capture distant subjects, or sports photographers who may need longer focal lengths depending on their shooting location in relation to the athletes on the field. In conclusion, the Fujifilm XF200 f2, when mated to the XH2S, it really is a gem for wildlife and action photographers, and it is the absolute best that Fujifilm has to offer. Its exceptional image quality, fast autofocus, and robust build make it a joy, but also very reliable to use in the field as long as you aren't shooting birds in flight or animals coming at a high rate of speed right at you. Although it comes with a hefty price tag of about $5,000 and some autofocus woes that have been bested by other top-tier mirrorless systems, if you are serious about wildlife and action photography, but don't have 12 grand to spend on the 400mm f2.8, this lens is worth every penny. I'm sad to say I found this lens lacking for birds in flight, which is a huge genre that I shoot, and I decided to sell this lens in favor of the Sony a7 IV and the 200-600 Sony lens. Only time will tell if I regret that decision this football season when I'm limited to shooting sports with a 70-200 f2.8 Sony lens. My initial impressions video with my Sony a7 IV and 200-600 Sony lens will be out soon. I will be making a direct comparison with that setup and this setup. Please let me know in the comments section if you have any questions related to this lens. Again, I have used it extensively and I've even used it for some portraits. That's it for today's review, folks. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you on the next video.